Hello and welcome to the Essential Adventure Sport podcast, where our aim is to shed some light on the world of adventure sports, be that top tips and best practice for coaches, leaders or guides, inspiring expeditions, or just a chat with one of the many interesting people who work and play in the outdoors. We really welcome interactions and discussions, so if you have an idea of a subject you'd like covering, or you'd like to contribute to the show itself, then please drop us a message. So it's time to sit back and enjoy this week's episode. Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the Essential Adventure Sport podcast. This week we're delighted to be joined by Dr Amy Whitehead. She's a reader in sports psychology and coaching, and she teaches on the psychology, the sports psychology, the sports coaching, the physical education programs, and they're all done at Liverpool John Moores University, which is just down the road. So good evening, Amy. Have I missed anything out there, or have I done you justice?
You've done me justice, but I don't teach on psychology, just sports psychology, coaching and PE.
It's all right. This is the worst start I've had to one of these. It's so many Y's and S's. So I first came across your work when I was studying for my own master's program, and I wanted to do some data collection, and I had this idea that I could get people to be involved in some sports adventure sport coaching, and then they could talk about what they were thinking about. And then when I started typing things into the internet, I came across the subject, which seems to be one of your main focuses of research. So that subject of Think Aloud. I also know that your research covers aspects such as decision making, which comes up a lot on the podcast, and also the differences between experts and novices. And what will be really interesting tonight, I think, is that you're coming to this conversation from pretty much a completely non-adventure sport background. So I think I'm right in saying that some of the areas of study have looked at things like golf and rugby league and more traditional sports.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, great. So as a little starter for 10, why don't you give us an overview of what this Think Aloud protocol is, because it's super interesting and I'm very excited about tonight.
Thanks for having me on. And yeah, I guess I started where you were when you were kind of doing your masters and looking at what methods we can use to collect data to understand decision making, to look at how people think. So back in, I think it was 2009, when I was just kind of starting on the journey of a PhD, I was really interested in how we look at decision making, and one of the kind of key things within a PhD is how do we collect that data. So I came across Think Aloud. It was actually my supervisor at the time suggested it. He'd been using it. And I guess when I looked into it a bit more, I looked at the benefits of capturing data or decision making as it happens. So Think Aloud is quite simply putting a microphone on an athlete and asking them to tell us what they're thinking as they're performing. So yeah, I spent 5 years doing a part-time PhD miking up golfers and looking at what golfers were thinking as they were playing over a round of golf. And within that, I looked at things like that you've already mentioned, differences between experts and novices in terms of what they're verbalizing, what they're thinking. And then I also looked at things like the differences between the data we get from the Think Aloud protocol versus kind of retrospective data. So if I ask you what you were thinking after the event, is it the same or is it different? Do you tell me different things, which we found, very different type of data during and after. And then the final study in my PhD looked at the differences between practice and competition and what changes cognitively when athletes might be under a little bit more stress and pressure. So that was kind of that's kind of what Think Aloud is and where it came from for me. And then since 2015, when I finished my PhD, I've been developing that in a range of different areas, from kind of looking at different sports, different athletes, coaches, coach developers, mentors, and applying it to different kind of areas there. So yeah, apologies in advance that I'm an absolute adventure sport novice. So I just want to put that out there before I make any terminology mistakes.
No, don't worry. We're a friendly bunch. We'll let you off. So your initial focus, was it around using it as a player athlete development tool, was it?
So originally it was just, I wanted to understand what people are thinking as they're performing. So it was a methodology, it was a method of data collection. But out of that research and through like putting a microphone on people and asking them to think aloud, what I started to kind of discover and realize is that after a golfer had played around the golf, they'd come to me and they'd say, I've learned X, Y, and Z about myself through using Think Aloud, because I'm verbalizing what I'm thinking, I'm realizing certain things. So I think that's where I've then developed it further more recently with the work I've done in coaching, where we've then looked at, well, can Think Aloud be a self-development tool for coaches specifically? And then more recently, I've been doing a lot of work back in golf, looking at how Think Aloud can be used as a self-reflection and development tool.
So I'm just trying to kind of match some stuff up in my head here, because there's lots going on there. One of the things I think I read, and again, tell me if I've got this wrong, but you said that it can be used as a reflective tool. Is that right? Yeah, and I'd be keen just to talk about some of that as well. But I think what you said was that it helps you to reflect on the experience that you've had rather than the memory of the experience.
Yeah, so I kind of I've started to, well, I came across a TED Talk by Daniel Kahneman when he talks about this whole thing around memory versus experience. And that links to really well to the initial study that I did back in kind of like 2010, where we compared the data that's been provided during Think Aloud and the retrospective interviews. And basically, like kind of in a nutshell, how we experience an event and how we remember an event can be very different depending on kind of, you know, what happened. It may be like how we feel at the end of an event. So that might have a massive effect on the positive or negative memories of that experience. And an easy example might be, we talk about this a lot when we're teaching students. So how do we make students have a nice experience or a good experience? And a guy, I can't remember the professor's name in America, where he gave one class at the end of every lecture a cookie, and then he taught another class exactly the same, but he didn't give them a cookie. And the class that got a cookie had a nice experience at the end of the event, so they remember his class as more positive. So I know I'm kind of going off on a bit of a tangent there, but in terms of kind of, you know, how we coach and then how we what experiences we give our participants or our athletes can massively affect their memory of that experience. And similarly, when we're reflecting on a coaching session, it might have been a really good session, but something less positive might have happened right at the end of that session, or the outcome wasn't what you wanted it to be. So you might remember that and your reflections might be quite negative, when actually you might have had some really positive things within that experience. So that's where Think Aloud comes in, where I ask coaches or even athletes now to kind of reflect as they're playing, to kind of reflect on the experience as it's happening while it's fresh in the mind, rather than just reflecting retrospectively where you're forgetting a lot of, you know, potentially key things that you should be thinking about.
So as a kind of side subject, because we've used the word reflection a few times there, one of it's worth us just explaining what we mean by reflection and the reflective process, reflective practice, because I guess that forms a big part of how we might use Think Aloud. So it might be worth us just, if you can take a couple of minutes just to describe what the art of reflection actually is.
Well, when I get coaches, I'll talk about coaches more specifically for this example, because I guess that's where most of the work I've done with reflection is. So when I ask a coach to mic themselves up and the coaching, so for example, rugby league, we've published a paper in rugby league where the coach will wear their clip mic and a dictaphone, and they'll coach normally as they're normally coaching. But where they can, we ask them to then step back from that session and then just start to reflect on, you know, the whys of what they're doing. So they might, what happens usually is that the coach will start just commentating and describing kind of what's happening in front of them. But as they get used to thinking aloud, what we then ask them to do is to talk about why. So why have you coached? Why have you set the session up in a certain way? Why are you using a certain tone? Why, or how do you know if that player's received the information that you've given them in the right way? And it's just constantly questioning the self as the coaching, to make sure that, well, it can be quite cognitively heavy to constantly do that all the time. And it is a process and something that a coach has to practice and get used to. But it is reflecting in action in this context of Think Aloud is about stepping back and constantly questioning the self and asking, why have I done this? Has the player received this information appropriately? Have I set this up in a safe way? And then when we reflect on action, so afterwards the coach might listen back, and then start questioning even more. So where have these reflections come from? Where has how I coach come from? So yeah, the Think Aloud is predominantly, reflection in action, constantly questioning the self during the session, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. So by the inaction, you basically mean that while we're involved in that process, we are taking mini moments within that, coaching episode to go, how's it going? What am I doing? Why am I doing it?
Yeah.
And that might then influence what you do next.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, when they think of reflection, I think they think about that second part you talked about, that reflecting on action. So on the drive home or in the clubhouse afterwards, or when we're in the pub or whatever it might be, but we're thinking, how's the day gone? And I guess there are pros and cons to doing that, aren't there? Because we can't change what we've just done afterwards, but it could help inform the next session, I think.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think, so that's kind of one of my pros of using Think Aloud, is because it hopefully helps people to recognize more quickly things that might not be going right within the session, and then they can change it as it's happening. But sometimes the penny might not drop until on the drive home, and that's also okay. And that we might have a different type of reflection on the drive home. But yeah, I think it's really important to reiterate that one isn't better than the other. They're just different, and using them all together, effectively, for me would be something that I would always advocate within coaching.
Is there any evidence or preference you think over how people engage in that on action reflection? So whether they just think about it, whether they have conversations, whether they make an entry into a diary or a journal, is there anything that can help support them? I'm thinking of the listeners at home, if they're saying, right, how can I best engage in this on action reflection?
In terms of on action reflection, so a colleague of mine, Zoe Knowles, she did a ton of research in reflective practice and coaching, looking at kind of the different ways to do it and the most effective ways to reflect on action. But if you ask every coach, they'll say, I always reflect. They'll say, yeah, I always think about, what I did on the way home. But for me, I think there's a quote, and I don't know if it's Sean or Dewey, and it's like, reflection is only effective if there's action at the end of it. So we can think and think and think and reflect all day, but if we don't change our actions based on our reflections, then they're not effective. It's not an effective reflection, because nothing's happening or changing. But I would always advocate, if you wanted to reflect on action, reflect with somebody else, like a critical friend, or just have a conversation, because again, you need to be challenged and being asked why and how you're going to change. Otherwise, we constantly go around in these circles of habit, and unless someone's challenging these reflections, then nothing really changes.
I bring you in on this little conversation we're having, Nick, over reflection. How active of a reflector are you after your working days, or maybe your personal days out in the outdoors?
Well, those comments that Amy just made have given me a small crisis of confidence, because I work alone a lot, and my drive home is a solitary one. I want to get home. There's other stuff to do. But you know well enough, Matt, that I do reflect a lot because I'm driven by insecurity and a relative lack of confidence that what I'm doing on any given day could be a lot better. Um, I'm fortunate to be part of a coaching community, and I've got good friends who do the same job. You being one of them, Matt. So I know we've had some really interesting conversations that's led to changes and developments in my coaching practice, but it doesn't happen immediately in the moment. It's inevitably reflective in terms of post coaching session, post activity. And I think that hasn't hindered the development of my coaching practice. It's been useful for me to take the time and then to, I suppose, get some counsel from yourself and other experienced friends. Um, there are occasions when I do get to coach with other people, and sometimes you and I work together. And then, of course, it feels much more immediate in the moment because we often exchange observations about the development of a coaching session while it's still taking place. A recent example being Friday last week when we worked together on a moving water session with some kayakers. So I'm convinced I reflect because I know that I've continued to change and develop what I'm doing. Whether I'm doing it as effectively as it could be is almost certainly. I could answer my own question there and say I'm pretty certain that I'm not, but it's got a little bit better over time as a result of paying attention to your studies, Matt, and to reading around the subject.
I mean, you work a lot with in kind of complex environments where you have people who are of different ability levels and can be, I don't want to use the word random in a negative way, but their actions can be quite random. So I think you do a lot of reflecting in action, don't you? It's like maybe you don't reflect on the fact that you do a lot of reflection. I don't know whether that's even a thing or not.
Are you asking me?
I'm just thinking. I'm thinking out loud, but not in the same way we're talking about.
I think that as a coach, I'm conscious of the reflection that I go through. It's not a subconscious activity that I suspect it might well have been in the past. And that's partly been driven by my work as a coach educator. I don't always operate in that domain, and I'm much more commonly working with clients who are seeking to develop skill and independence. But because I work as a trainer of other coaches and leaders, I'm obliged to address this question. And one of the most useful areas of exploration for me in the last couple of years was when you introduced me to this concept of Think Aloud, Matt. And in order to get my head around it, I read a few things, discussed them with you. And then I started to make sense of it in my own mind by considering the present, the past, and the future. And then working with clients where we did some projecting and anticipating what might happen if they took a certain series of actions. We used it in the present by observing conditions and the way in which those environmental factors were influencing them. And we also did a lot of reflective stuff in a very classic coaching environment where cycles of activity would be set up and people would check in with me following a particular set of activity. And I think that awareness of, I suppose you academics would call it like a temporal focus or something, like present, past, future. That started to help me structure my use of reflection that I might have in the past saved until the end of the day. There you go. It started to feature much more within my coaching sessions.
And you talked about using it as a coach and as a coach educator, and I think we can do both those things, Amy, can't we? And we can use it as a participant as well. So I wonder if it's worth exploring how each of those sections of people, those sections of job role, could use it, and then maybe you can provide some examples from your world, and then we can kind of complement with some examples from our world as well.
Yeah, great. So I'll come back to what Nick was saying, because he mentioned two things, like being conscious of his reflections and activities, and awareness, because they're the two main things that Think Aloud does for coaches, in my opinion. So that was great to hear that. And what it sounds like is Nick's kind of, you know, taken it and put it into a structure, which again is awesome. So I might speak to you after this, Nick, and pinch that for some of our teaching. So yeah, from like you've just said, we've got athlete, coach, and we've got coach developer. And with all three of them groups of people, we can use Think Aloud, and I have done. So originally, and kind of this is where the original work came from, is using Think Aloud from a research perspective to understand how people think. But then once we put that into an applied perspective, we can use it for the athlete to understand how they think, because they're becoming more aware, and then they can also listen back to that audio. And then from a coach or a sports psychologist perspective, so I work as a sports psychologist as well, and I might give a golfer, for example, a dictaphone, a clip mic, ask them to play around golf, and I'll use that data or them verbalizations, and I'll listen back to them, because I can observe things about them. Like, for example, whether they're using pre-performance routines that I might have helped them implement, how they cope after a bad shot, so if they get angry or frustrated. And we can look at patterns in thought processes and how that links to performance. I used to work with a guy who, every time he was indecisive, so he would be like, right, 7 iron, no 8 iron, and he'd jump between the two. It would always be a less successful shot, because he was never 100% clear in his mind what that would be, or he was never 100% committed to that. So from an applied perspective with an athlete, we can use it as kind of a needs analysis tool to understand them, and then we can put in interventions and then re-look at their kind of thought processes. You can look at them in different situations, so if you put them in the different constraints and how they react to that. Then from a coach perspective, like we've just discussed, I use Think Aloud with coaches as a development tool and as a reflection tool. So I've developed what I call the Think Aloud program, where I might go and work with a group of coaches, but I'll work with them over like a 3-month period. So I'll introduce them to Think Aloud in an initial workshop. As you can imagine, they might be a little bit worried or a little bit self-conscious about being told that they've got to wear a clip mic and a dictaphone and verbalize what they're thinking as the coaching. And during that workshop, it's just getting them comfortable with kind of what we're asking them to do. And then I just send them away for like a month back into their own coaching environment and just to have a go. I always say this, but the first time anyone ever used Think Aloud, and I'm sure yourself and Nick have experienced that element of, you know, self-consciousness, feeling like a bit of feeling a bit silly because people can see that you're talking to yourself. So yeah, I think, and what a lot of coaches do, they'll commentate, definitely like the initial time they use it. So giving them a couple of like 2 or 3 coaching sessions to get used to it, and then getting them to listen back is a really big eye opener for them. So I just had an email like half an hour ago from a coach I'm supporting in Ireland, and she wrote, I had a wee go, but I don't want to say we because I've realised that I constantly say it every other word. So even just one time she's used it, she's realising like certain little habits that she's got. And she said she mic'd herself up during a match, and she literally didn't say one word to certain players on the pitch. So again, it's just developing that self-awareness around how you treat your players, how you speak to your players, how you set up a match on match day, how you react if things aren't going right, and how that affects your players. So yeah, that's kind of the program. And then from a group perspective, I'll bring coaches back into a workshop and we'll just unpick their reflections, and everyone has their own individual experiences, and then they might go and use that again. And then finally, from a coach developer perspective, a coach developer can use Think Aloud in 2 ways. So they can use it for themselves. So if you're a coach developer working with a coach, you can use it. So for example, if you're watching a coach, you can be thinking, right, how am I going to communicate with this coach? How am I going to feedback? How am I going to make sure that how I'm developing this coach is effective? So basically you're using it as a reflective tool, but you can also get your coach to use it and then share that Think Aloud file with you. And you can use that file as a coach development tool to listen, to unpick some of their coaching behaviours and have some really nice discussions around how they're coaching. And it's not an interrogation tool, it's just a nice discussion tool to start asking questions about their coaching and how you might help them develop. So I hope that kind of gives you an overall overview of how Think Aloud can be used from athlete, coach and coach developer.
And is it becoming more of a tool that some of the sports, the governing bodies that you work with are using as part of their coach development programs?
Yeah, I've been really fortunate to work with people like the FA, the RFL, and then also individual clubs as well. So yeah, I've been doing a lot of work with the grassroots coaches and the mentors as well from the FA, and we've kind of implemented programs within that. And then I'm kind of having discussions with other people from different NGBs around how we might formally implement that into kind of a level 2 or a level 3 qualification as part of the reflective processes within them qualifications. And can it be quite a nice little tool for a coach to use and then reflect on as part of a level 2 or a level 3 or even a level 1? I'm not saying that it's not appropriate at that level.
Yeah, I guess the skill becomes then how you go about using it, isn't it? And how you go through the practice of it's not just a case of miking yourself up and talk, because in the end, I suppose what you're saying before is that if I mic myself up and I do a really good job, I never listen to that recording, well then it's only half the job done, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And you're right, it is a process. So a lot of people will say, oh yeah, I think Aloud, I've been doing that for years. But they might have been putting a microphone on them for years and just recording their own coaching, but they're not actually thinking aloud. They're not talking through their reflections. Then they're not listening to it back, and then they're not reflecting on action. So it's kind of, that's why I call it a bit of a program, because there are processes to it. And I think that's what I need to do better, is to produce something that says these are the clear processes that someone should go through to kind of get the full benefit of the whole process.
So they're more just recording what it is that they've done rather than, like you say, that what they're thinking about while they're doing it.
Yeah, and a lot of people will record in video and then they'll just look at coach behaviors rather than reflections. So that's, for me, there's a big difference between watching yourself and listening back and reflecting as you're going.
I'm trying to think if we're saying that we could do it as a more formal get a program, a set of protocols together. I've been working this weekend and I've had a couple of people who've kind of worked alongside me and assisted, observed, those sort of things. And I think they've also found it useful for me to think aloud why they're sat next to me, because then they get to see what's going on in my head and maybe why I'm structuring the practice in the way that I'm doing it and my kind of decision making around my coaching session. Is that a valid use of the tool?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I hope you don't mind, but it'd be cool. The last time we spoke, you talked me through some different ways that you use Think Aloud. So I don't know if it'd be beneficial to share that.
Yeah, definitely. So let me think of how I've used it, because I've used it this weekend a couple of times. And actually it fits in with some of your other research around making decisions and awareness and those elements. So one thing I notice with some people I work with is actually their technical skills tend to be pretty good. You know, the common thing that they can all move, in this case, their boats around and get them to where they want to be. And a lot of the time, it could be that their either awareness of the environment, the decision making, so their kind of tactical side of things is the thing that actually we can really work on. And I was lucky enough to spend 2 days with the same people this weekend, and some of the feedback from the second day was that actually I'd not thought about me, you know, why this is happening and why I'm doing these things. So one example of how I used it was I got the team to paddle through a circuit in and around the rocks, and then ask them some questions about what the environment was doing and how it was influencing what they were doing and how they were making decisions based on what they were doing. And the detail, the richness of the response was pretty limited because everyone ends up just focusing on the task and then not taking into account all these other factors. So when I made them do, you know, the think aloud part, first of all, like you said, everyone was going, "Oh, I'm not speaking out loud. This just sounds silly." But they eventually get into it. One person decided they were going to shout, and I said, "Well, that might not be the best." But I asked them to think about what it was that they were seeing, what their response to what it was that they were seeing was, why they were doing it. So basically, just verbalize anything that they were thinking, just to say it out loud. And then when they came back, I noticed the level of detail and richness in what they were saying was so much bigger, so much bigger. And I think I read something when I was first looking at this, is that it helps you reflect on what actually happened as opposed to what you think had happened. So they'd often come back and give me a response, and I'd go, "That's what you thought you did. That's not what you did, and it's not a problem. But go and do it again, and let's talk through it." And then they came back, and straight away they went, "Oh no, actually, what I did was this," because you were kind of increasing their awareness, I suppose. Is that?
Yeah, I think so. What you just mentioned there, we did a study with coaches where we asked them beforehand, you know, how are you going to coach this match? So what do you think you do when you coach this match? And they're like, I mean, I'm kind of exaggerating here, but they're like, yeah, I've done everything I need to do. The players are ready. I'll just stand on the sideline and, you know, just won't say much really. Then they're mic'd up, they're using Think Aloud, and they're non-stop shouting at the players, you know, reacting. Some of them weren't really using Think Aloud properly because they were just they weren't actually reflecting as they were going. But just by recording the audio of them kind of during the coaching a match and then playing it back to them, made them realise, well, how I think I coach a match on a Saturday afternoon and how I really coach a match are worlds apart. And so you're exactly right in terms of it makes a lot of people realise, you know, how maybe this comes out a lot, like how negative they might be following, you know, a bad performance or an outcome, or some of the negative kind of self-talk and dialogue that we have with ourselves. Or actually it might make people realise how well a performance is going, but sometimes it might not have gone as well as they wanted, but at certain times it went better than they would have remembered it otherwise, if that makes sense. So yeah, you're right in that respect. So they use Think Aloud is used in police driver training, where they get the person who's training to verbalise everything they're thinking as they're driving, so that they can be completely aware of everything that's around them and kind of the process that they should be going through. And it's also used in things like nurse training as well. So there's in kind of medical research and applied practice, there's a thing called clinical decision making that practitioners, so they should be going through certain processes to get to an outcome. And Think Aloud is used to kind of help make people aware of them processes that they're going through, but also to train people more effectively to go through them processes. And I can imagine in adventure sports, there's some pretty kind of life or death or more dangerous situations than on a golf course. And I'm sure there's some quite clear processes that athletes or participants, you know, should be going through to get to their outcome. So yeah.
I find myself personally using it, whether I'm, you know, out for my own day or whether it's a working day. But sometimes, if you're right, if I get to a place that things are looking a little more complex, or I've, you know, I need to make some choices, then I tend to find if I say things out loud, it's almost like me having a conversation with myself, and by saying it, it makes it a little bit more real, and can help me think, right, if you're having to say, oh, I've got to be aware of that person and how they're interacting with whatever it is, well, then that must be something that in my brain is saying that's a higher level of importance for me.
Yeah.
So it helps me focus a little bit more. So if I think it and I say it, well, it must be worth thinking about, possibly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Sorry, go on.
No, go on.
Well, I was just going to talk through some of the kind of the findings from some of the research that we've done. So, and I'm just trying to think, because it all applies kind of in your world, especially if we look at things like how people might think under pressure. So if you're looking at so in golf, for example, we put people in just a practice competition. Nothing was being measured, no scores were being taken, and then we put them in a competitive environment, exactly the same course, kind of conditions, weather, everything else. But the only difference is it was a competition. You know, there's money to be won. There was a leaderboard. And we found clear differences in how people think during competition. And specifically those people that are maybe more prone to suffer under pressure, so you know, more prone to choking. Or I looked at specifically reinvestment. So by reinvestment, I mean these people would start to overthink during kind of high pressured environments. And I can only relate to kind of myself, like rock climbing, and when I start kind of, so you start to get extremely nervous and anxious, and basically then what starts to happen is your attentional focus just zones in. So it's so narrow that I can't see kind of where my next move is on the wall. And that happens in golf as well, where during competition, those athletes were more prone to choking, their attentional focus became completely narrow, and they started to think more technical rather than where they were going to hit the ball, and more tactical and strategically. So we were able to identify that through using Think Aloud, because we could see how their thought processes had changed and what they were verbalizing changed from being more kind of tactical to very internally focused and narrow.
I'm wondering, Nick, if we work in a recreational world predominantly. You know, there are competitive disciplines within what we do, and definitely within the climbing world, and there are Olympic sports from a paddle sport point of view. But I think when we're out leading groups and things get a bit challenging, well, that can probably generate the same sort of psychology as it does in competition. And yeah. I also wonder, and I'd be interested to hear from you on this, Nick, but we have our qualifications are based around a training, consolidation, and then an assessment, a performance assessment, and that could be over a couple of days. And some of the adventure sports, the assessments for some of these qualifications may last 5, 6, 7 days, so it's a long period of time. So I wonder if people who are engaging in leadership assessments, Nick, if this would be a really handy thing for them to help not get over task focused and reduce that attentional focus, like Amy just said then.
Yeah, I've been dwelling on that while you've been having this discussion, and I was quite struck by the point you made, Amy, about the difference between technical and tactical focus when people were experiencing a sense of consequence around their actions in a competitive environment. And in adventure sports, I don't think it's that much different to golf, really. I think it's time for me to admit my guilty secret, because before I really got into adventure sports in my early 20s, I played a lot of golf. In my late teens, it was what I did. I identified as a golfer. Just a very average amateur golfer, but I used to play a variety of county events in the northwest of England. And you know what? It did feel like life or death. And it is an open environment with an awful lot of things that change. And although I had no experience of paddle sport in white water or sea or surf, I was very struck by the psychological demands of the game and the time that was spent between shots. Because like lots of, especially young golfers, I guess, some of my worst performances were reserved for the competition day. And I used to get really frustrated by my inability to replicate performance that I was clearly capable of when it really mattered. And I realized that I had to enter a mindset where I could observe the factors that would influence my shot choice. Things like wind strength and direction and the gradient of the slope and the texture of the grass and how wet the grass was and stuff like that, and just focus on the decision to hit the shot in a particular way. And I found over time that helped me a great deal. I think back then I had really naive ideas about what I was doing, and I might have characterized it as not caring as much, but I knew I did care. And it seemed to work for a couple of summers anyway. I found I was playing at my potential. And then I got into adventure sports, and especially paddling. And I was quickly introduced to whitewater kayaking, and I realized there was some parallels, really, because rivers aren't always consistently difficult, and you'd be going down an easy section knowing there was something hard coming up, and you'd have to prepare yourself for that. And I think that I noticed that if you engage in self-talk that's rooted in developing a higher level of confidence, it's often reflective on previous experiences and it's quite internalized. And it left me realizing that I was missing environmental cues. So as a coach these days, when I'm trying to help people be better as paddlers, often it's rooted in their confidence and their decision making. And while we might need to address some underlying reasons for particular confidence levels, I've noticed that when people's focus becomes more external and they're taking in environmental cues and they're becoming more aware of their situation, then it takes them a lot closer to an ability to make a suitable tactical decision, which is often the key decision that they need to make. They're generally good enough paddlers to do what they want to do. We have to get them past the problems they have, recognizing the elements that are going to impact on them, and then making a suitable decision. So I don't know. I'm wondering, because this is a lot of this has been coach orientated, and a lot of people listening to the podcast are coaches, but most of us, whether we coach or not, we're interested in getting better at what we do. I'm still trying to figure out how Think Aloud can help the participant, the performer, when there's no coach around. What could participants do the next time they go and take part in their sport for themselves without interacting with a coach?
Yeah, great question. So similar to golf, I'll use that again, is a golfer might not see a coach on a regular basis. So what we've been doing with golfers is just getting them to mic themselves up and think aloud. So not think aloud anything in particular. We're not giving them any specifics, just verbalize everything they're thinking as they're performing where possible. So, I mean, if you're in certain situations in adventure sports, that might not be possible to do, but where possible, verbalize kind of what you're thinking as it's happening. and then listen back to that afterwards. And so in golf, for example, we've developed a bit of a template that says things like, you know, what have you observed? How has that affected your performance? What, very simple, like what would you do differently next time? And if the athlete or the participant has got a coach, they can even send that audio file to the coach and say, can you have a listen to this? What do you think? You know, I've noticed this, this and this about myself. What do you think? Or even just use it as to have a reflective conversation with the coach. But so for example, in golf, I might work with a golfer who will use Think Aloud on their own over a period of time. And they might map it to their performance. So they might think, right, well, on hole 3, I made I hit a terrible shot. Well, why was that? What was I thinking before it?
Yeah.
And looking at kind of certain patterns where bad decisions were made, but what was going on around that decision that led to that bad decision, which led to the bad outcome of the shot. So I'm a little bit reluctant to kind of prescribe to anyone really kind of what you should be thinking about, but there's a million different things that athletes can kind of discover or learn about themselves through using Think Aloud. I use kind of the getting angry one quite a lot because, you know, it's one of the most common things that we do as athletes. We get frustrated and then that links to negative performance. But yeah, you can. I got another good example. One of my master's students, he's a triathlete, but he used Think Aloud over 11 weeks of training during 2 cycling sessions a week, and he started to kind of understand things about himself in terms of when he was not training as effectively. So we said he's become more focused on what he's thinking during a training session, rather than just kind of his mind would just drift off usually. He wasn't kind of purposely thinking about his aims and his objectives of his session. He was just kind of getting distracted really easily. And but as a result of using Think Aloud and becoming more task focused, his times have improved. His training is more purposeful, so he feels like he's getting a little bit more out of each training session. So yeah, I don't know if that helps kind of answer your question there.
Yeah, it does. It sounds like it has the capacity to be unique to each individual. And I guess what folk are looking for is evidence of patterns that might either positively or negatively influence their experience. One person's thoughts could be beneficial to them if they have a particular set of thoughts, and another person could have those same thoughts that don't enhance their performance. It leaves me wondering what I think about in certain situations. I'll spare you an anecdote at this point while I'm trying to think of one. Interesting, because there's a few technological barriers that we face in our adventure sports, but they're not insurmountable. It's especially with modern day smartphones. It's quite feasible to have our students recording their observations in a way that they could then listen back to and reflect on.
Yeah.
Have you done that at all, Matt?
You're
gonna have to say yes now, aren't you?
I'm gonna have to say yes. I've not, but I'm thinking now about what we did on Friday. So I'm sorry, Amy, it's outdoor jargon alert now.
No problem.
But we spent a day on Friday working with some people, and we were moving from a patch of still water, crossing a what we call an eddy line into where the flow was running, and then they had to go to another patch of still water. So they were making this move, and I wonder if there's scope within what we do, participants, so they could be there on their own, but rather than thinking aloud for the period of their session, have almost mini Think Aloud sessions where each time they do an action, they're thinking about what it is that they think is going to happen, So like this whole perception action thing. So what they're going, right, my intention is to go from here to there, and given everything that's going on, this is what I'm going to do. Then they do it, and they're still commentating and thinking about what effect that's had, and maybe reflecting in the moment about decisions that they're making. And then once they've done it, topping that up with some further reflections, and then coming away and reviewing that one moment, which then may help them with their next bit. Is that a way of using it in short little hits rather than doing it over a longer period?
Yeah, are you asking me or Nick?
I'm asking you, but Nick can get involved. But yeah, I'm asking you whether we could do it through small actions. I suppose it would be the same in golf. That we could go, this is my intention, this is what I think I'm going to do, this is what I'm doing, this is what I've done. Right, why did those things happen?
Yeah, 100%. And that's what, like I was saying earlier, like I'm always really cautious about prescribing like certain ways to use it, because I love it when I'll speak to someone who said, oh, I've read your paper, but I use it in this way, and I've adapted it this way. So and I think you're right, like using it over a whole session can be quite cognitively demanding as well. So just doing it in little sections could be a really like neat way to do it. And also looking at kind of the pre and post verbalizations and what you're thinking, because like in golf, for example, you can't verbalize what you're thinking as you're hitting the ball, because it's impossible. It's going to ruin your performance. So yeah, looking at your right perception and action, or preempting your decision and your process and your behaviors, and then reflecting on, you know, why you've done what you've done. Was it effective? What could you do differently? Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, I think, Matt, we use it in a couple of ways commonly, and have done for quite a long time now. By way of example, the coaching session that we were both involved in on Friday last week, we did quite a lot of projecting with the students, anticipating the move they were going to make. They'd tell us where they were planning to go across that area of faster water, and they would focus their attention as part of our coaching activities on position on the eddy line they were going to cross. So which bit of the eddy line were they going to choose? What angle and what speed were they going to use? And they could verbalize that to us. We could ask them that question. And during the session, they were increasingly capable of saying, I'm going to cross there with this angle at this speed. And then typically as coaches, we reflect on it with them. We observe, and rather than providing direct feedback, we ask them the question to elicit the answer that we already know. We've seen it, but we're interested to know what they've observed and how they can compare the action they've just experienced with their immediate recollection of it, which then leads us into the next cycle. Because of the nature of what we do, although the action takes a while, we can't go with them very easily. And it's generally held to be a bit disruptive to their performance if we're contributing anything in that moment. But I've witnessed you getting people to reflect aloud in action, Matt. And I experimented with it a wee bit with leaders who would make observations of environmental changes as they were progressing along a section of coastline. And then we would start to look at how that would impact on their decision making. I guess it's kind of interesting to find more ways to do it in the moment. Yeah. I think we're quite used to doing it before and after, maybe not so much during.
And then I guess another question is from me is, everything you've said that you get people to verbalize out loud is kind of what they're going to do, maybe why they're going to do it. But then there's another element of, well, how do they feel in that moment? And for me, I think that's something that it's not that we don't care about how they feel, but by asking them or by verbalizing how we feel, we then can link kind of feelings to thoughts and actions. Because I'm just thinking about me in an adventure sports setting, I'd probably be extremely nervous and stressed. Then adding on the element of, right, what am I going to do? And then looking at the outcome. Well, if it was a negative outcome, was that because I might have known what I had to do, but because I was so stressed or nervous or anxious, did that have a negative effect on kind of the outcome? So yeah, I'm not sure if I'm kind of muddying the waters or throwing a spanner in the coaching works, but I don't know if that's something that you guys kind of explore with the participants that you're working with.
I don't, but well, maybe I do, but we need to think about that a little bit more. But I had a moment over the weekend where I had someone within my group whose experience level was relatively low. Actually, their performance level was really good, but they'd commented several times that they were doing things that they didn't think they were able to do because they weren't able to calibrate the environment and those sort of points. And I'm wondering if what you said there can be a really positive thing, as well as figuring out what went wrong, to go, actually, I've just done that, and I felt nervous, apprehensive, and actually, as a consequence of reflecting on it, I actually feel a lot better than I thought I was going to feel. So why was that? And then can I take a screenshot of that, or feel that experience, and then kind of replicate it in other places that I go to? So going away, going, actually, that was better than I thought it was going to be. And I can maybe use that information to help me with my performance at another date.
Yeah. Nick, were you going to say something then?
I was listening to Matt's answer and considering how useful it's going to be next time I'm out there. I think we do. I think we do link this to emotion, because the environment in which we operate invariably generates emotion in people. It's either excitement or anxiety, or somewhere between the two. And it's quite unusual if people are in an environment which they feel reasonably challenged by, that they don't have an emotional response. And it could all be positive, and it could be necessary to manage the emotions so that they can more effectively tune into environmental cues. But quite commonly we get people who are understandably nervous, because we all have a comfort level beyond which we start to feel unhappy, and you might have encountered that in a rock climbing situation. I know exactly how that feels. And I think that I, as a person who's only read around these subjects in a slightly non-academic sense, I've often used external focus, both narrow and broad, to take people's attention a little away from the internalizing that's been going on prior to that, in order to better permit them to prepare for and then actually perform the activity. And I use it myself. There's certain things I do that still make me nervous, and a whitewater paddling environment can quite quickly become like that for me. And I do know that an internal focus isn't going to help me in the moment. So I actively coach myself to focus on relevant cues. I'm quite practiced in it now, so it gets me down quite a few rapids. And I think that's what I'm trying to help my students achieve as a coach. I'm starting to feel like I'm moving slightly away from Think Aloud, but I'm trying to find a way to put the two together now. So I'll take some more steerage from you both if I can.
I made some notes while you were both saying stuff, and I'm going to go back to it a moment, because we talked about that session on Friday where we were getting people to verbalize, and then we were getting people to take part in the action, and then we were discussing those things afterwards. And I think in some of those cases, there's also scope that process of saying things out loud might also be quite a supportive tool for the people that are around them as well, and a useful thing for them to hear. Oh, whoever Nick's intending on doing this. This is what he did, and that was what happened. Whether them hearing what the intention was is a useful, like, reciprocal tool that they can use with themselves, that they could use as a group of friends going out doing whatever. And by them sharing those thoughts out loud, well, then it becomes a bit of a hive mind. They go, oh, I thought you were going to do that. You did that. Why? How did this happen? How did that make you feel? Well, let's try this. And they can also engage, so then they can maybe end up engaging in a coaching process among non-coaches. I think. Does that make any of that make any sense?
Yeah, that's a great idea, and that's something that we kind of touch a little bit upon when I work with a group of coaches. So sometimes I've worked with coaches where they'll coach together, and they'll be verbalizing what they're thinking, and then reflecting, and they might share some of that really briefly with the person next to them. But I think what that does do, and then coming together, if you've got a group of athletes working together, all comfortable to verbalize what they're thinking out loud, you then automatically developing a more cohesive group, because they kind of, I always use the word they feel that they're able to be vulnerable, or we talk about psychological safety. So if I feel completely comfortable to be able to say everything I'm thinking, even if it's wrong, or I'm going to feel a little bit stupid saying it, well, how great would that be if I say I think I'm going to do something but it's wrong, and then you can correct me and save me from making a really big mistake. So yeah, I think it's a great idea, but it's about getting them group of people all to be in the same boat, and kind of all being comfortable with kind of verbalizing their thoughts and feelings as they happen.
I wonder if that also translates to when people are, leading groups as well, that the idea of sharing those thoughts and that information could be a useful way of developing the group members' awareness and their decision making and those sort of different elements.
I've just made a note of that. I've called it cohesive Think Aloud.
There you go. You heard it here first. No, but I think a lot of our coaching tends to be like that because it's non-competitive, and it's not it's not an us versus them, and people end up being quite collaborative with what they're doing because they all are in a place together, and most of the time everybody wants everyone else to succeed. And that phrase you use, that psychological safety, I used that phrase a few times this weekend, saying, you know what, that's what we want to create here. We want to create an environment that everyone feels physically safe, but also it's okay to fail, and it's okay to ask questions or to say things that might not be right, because no one in the group's going to look at them and kind of laugh or judge them or anything like that. And I think that's a really important thing, isn't it, within our groups that we work with, athletes, performer groups that we work with, that we can encourage that element. So let me think about how we could use this. I'm kind of, going off on a bit of a tangent here now, but a big theme, like we said right at the start, within these podcasts and within the sort of work that Nick and I do is around decision making and around improving that. So not just improving a performer's performance as a coach, or improving your own performance. So thinking about how it can be used around making good choices. Is there any particular research or work done around that side of things over how my performance was as to the choices that are made, even if it's in something like golf, for example?
In terms of, there is some stuff around anticipatory kind of research and looking at how people anticipate certain situations, but that's more, I think there's some research in cricket where they mic up a batter and it's like a simulation, so the bowler bowls at them and then they kind of say what kind of shot they might hit. I'm just trying to think from your sport perspective and looking at how Think Aloud can be used for a decision, to improve decision making. I think from an applied perspective, what you might be looking at, and you probably do this anyway, is getting these athletes. So I'm using kayaking, for example, to use Think Aloud, verbalize everything they're thinking as they're going through a course, but then listening back to it and looking at the process that they've gone through. So what were their options? So a lot of, in golf, for example, it's easy to verbalize your options. So you come to a ball, it's on the fairway, you've got a distance, and then a golfer might talk through 3 different ways that they can hit that shot. So there you've got your 3 different kind of decisions around what shot you're going to hit. Now you haven't got the luxury of that time in most of your adventure, well, I'm going to guess all adventure sports. But what you can do is retrospectively look at that decision-making process and kind of unpick that and look at whether it was the right decision to make. And then think back and look at what were the other options that kayaker or that athlete could have made, and then looking at why did they make that decision. And I think going through them processes long-term can help develop either a better decision-making process or get these athletes to understand, the different decisions that they could have made.
I like the idea of doing that. I think we probably do those things when you're delivering your your training courses, Nick. Your leadership training courses. Do you encourage? Well, I know a leading question this. Do you encourage people to consider all their options and share them, say them out loud? Is that something that you deliberately do, or?
Well, that we typically break down journeys along the coastline into short legs that are typically less than 1 kilometer. So we're never paddling very far before we pause at what we term decision points. And one underlying theme is the notion of how we're going to get to the next decision point. Because in the same way that a golfer could select from a range of shots, a paddler could choose to follow a number of different routes to get to their next decision point. And the decisions that they make, the routes that they follow, will give them different experiences. Frequently on training days, we're observing environmental factors and group responses. So we're collecting information that's relevant to the next decision. And I think we frequently verbalize it together as a group, and it's in the form of questions and answers. And I think one of the benefits that arises from that is that we increasingly become attuned to the stuff that's relevant, and we start to filter out the noise that doesn't matter in the moment. Yeah, maybe there is a ferry heading into Holyhead Harbour, but it's not going to come through the area where we're paddling. And in the moment, it's not particularly relevant information to us. Far more appropriate is the interaction of wind and tide as we go around the headland. Probably not a great example, but there we go. So yeah, I think that we do break down the leadership task into discrete chunks, which give people the opportunity to project and to reflect. What have we learned in the last 10 minutes that would help us with the next decision? What can we anticipate about what the next 10 minutes are going to bring? What might we want to focus on, and what can we afford to disregard right now?
I think from a Think Aloud perspective, I'm never advocating that anyone uses this all the time, because it is cognitively demanding. It can get too much. But from that perspective, and the reason I advocate it is because if we are verbalizing, we've got a clip mic on and we're saying out loud what we're thinking, we're becoming more aware and more conscious of these processes. And then it helps, again, as Nick said, speed up that kind of what is relevant and what's not, and what do we need to filter out and what do we need to keep. It's just bringing it more to our focus. so that next time when you are going through that same situation or a similar situation, you can quickly get rid of the things that you don't need, and what you do need is kind of will come to you like quicker or more consciously, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's a common tool anyway, isn't it? That if we another example from the weekend, so we did a journey, and the experience level in the group was quite mixed. We had some people who hadn't done a lot of planning trips, so kind of we're always a group member, but almost like a passive group member, just going along and engaging in it. And we spent a good period of time at the start of the day planning a trip, but sharing that information and allowing them to talk through what was going on. And the fact that we did that, in that case, decisions were taken slowly because we were sat around a table and we were getting rained on, but that wasn't a big problem. And it was really interesting that because we'd shared it and they'd spoken about it and they'd done the looking up of times and what things are going on in certain places, that when we got on the water, they were then part of it, and the decisions that they were making were then influenced because what they thought was going to happen, they were seeing whether it was happening or wasn't happening. And then it made them go away and think, right, okay, I've got a bit more understanding as to why some of these things occurred. So being part of that process, I think, was good for them, helping to make decisions, because now they go away going, right, now I know that there's either a connect or a disconnect between what I think is going to happen and what has actually happened. Interesting stuff. Do you notice any difference between how people engage in this process and how people reflect, whether they are whether it's coaches or performers, whether they're more expert performers or whether they're more novice performers? Is there a difference in how people do that, or is it all, could you have a novice performer who's good at reflection and an expert performer who's poor at reflection? Is there any correlation between the two?
Yeah, I honestly don't. I think you can have exactly what you said there. You know, some novices really good, some experts not so great. But I think because if from a coach perspective, most coaches have been through a process of training, which is included reflection. So they should be, you know, okay at reflection. But yeah, from an athlete perspective, there's no difference in terms of their ability to reflect. I think it's just what they reflect on is different. So if you look at a novice, and when they use Think Aloud, they're very, if you think about, you know, skill acquisition, they're very in the cognitive stage. So they're always thinking about technique, bit of kind of, you know, self kind of praise, like, come on, you can do this kind of thing. And then when we look at use like Think Aloud, whether it's just from a data collection perspective or a reflective perspective, your higher level or your experts are very externally focused. So like Nick's mentioned, you know, when we are trying to get people not to be anxious, we get them to focus externally and not thinking internally. And that's, for me, the biggest difference between your experts and your novices, because your experts don't need to reflect on technique and think about in golf the grip or the stance and the swing. Everything's just right, where am I going to hit it, and I'm going to focus on, you know, all the external factors that are going on around me. So, you know, you've got your declarative and your procedural knowledge and the difference between them. So yeah, but from taking reflection to an even deeper level and looking at why, like from a coaching perspective, what we then do is say, right, well, why do you reflect on these things and why do you coach the way you coach? So we then, like reflecting on action, would then ask a coach, where have these behaviors come from? So then you can start to think deeper and think about you as a person. So even looking at how you were coached or how you were brought up as a person, like as Northerners, do we reflect differently to Southerners? Like, and all these social cultural things that like then link into, you know, how we reflect, what we reflect on, language that we use. You know, you can look at all of that, them kinds of things, and look at where they've come from, and then how do they link to how we use Think Aloud and what do we reflect on. So yeah, we're taking it to another level there. But if we're looking at proper reflection from a coaching perspective, we need to question who we are as well as who we are as a coach.
Yeah, and that idea of where do we get our ideas, and by that I don't mean, you know, stealing of ideas, but the people that we've been influenced by, or I guess we could start talking about philosophies and things like that. You know, they're all part of the same thing, aren't they? You know, what are our values and beliefs, all those elements. And yeah, I've not really thought about it from that point of view, how we reflect based on some social cultural stuff.
So you work with Nick. Does Nick influence your thoughts and actions, and do you influence Nick's?
Yeah, I think he definitely influences my thoughts and actions.
In all the worst ways.
In the worst way. No, but it's good because it's also good to be challenged a bit by things, isn't it, as well? And keep using the same example from this weekend, but it's the most current coaching that I've been involved in. We had another coach who was involved in the event stay with us, so we had a third head in the room, which isn't always common. So for 3 nights running, we'd come back and we'd talk about our day, and we'd share ideas and mix things around. And yeah, I think the idea of where our background is, where our coaching background is pretty important, because Nick said right at the start of the day, he works in isolation quite a bit. So finding those moments where he can reflect on his practice with another coach is good. But then I know he also uses the clients, the students that he works with, and he engages in a robust reflection or review at the end of each one of his days, which I think you find is a useful tool, don't you, Nick, to kind of gauge how things are going with your coaching days?
Yeah, I do. Would be so arrogant as to just assume that if I thought it was a good day, it had been. But I think that my motivation, I know my motivation is rooted in our favourite phrase, Matt, making ourselves redundant and not being needed anymore, because that takes me closer to retirement. But of course, realistically, our paddlers do their own thing far more frequently, either alone or with friends, than they ever spend in a coaching environment. So it's going to be totally unhelpful if we create a situation where they're just depending on us for feedback, for reflection, and so on. And well, you and I have worked together a great deal, Matt, so you'll have noticed that virtually everything I organize in those review sessions is rooted in questions, and there's always a follow-up question, because I want the students to reach for the answers. It seems to be very reinforcing. In fact, we did it in the middle of the day on Friday in order to provide an impetus for the afternoon and to find out where people's focus was going to lie for the next 2 hours. So I think that I think I can continue to improve that area of my coaching, especially because I've learned a lot about it in recent years. I'm curious to see where it takes me in the coming seasons.
What you just mentioned there, kind of developing students' reflective process. I know when I've engaged in some coach education, either as a coach educator or, you know, being involved in it. So I've done rugby league coaching qualifications, basketball, all this, and reflection kind of always gets talked about, and it's always kind of chucked in there. Oh yeah, and you've got to reflect. You know, go and write a reflection on your session. But do you notice across, and you haven't got to name any names here, but across different governing bodies, they approach reflection in a different way, and some do it better than others. And if they do, what are the things that they've built into their programs that encourage their coaches or encourage their athletes to be more reflective?
Yeah, definitely. I have noticed differences, but I think, again, without naming any specific NGBs, some have got more money than others.
Yeah, okay.
And so I think there's like a hierarchy of what people think are important. So you've always got like your tactical and your technical are always at the top. And kind of reflection gets kind of pushed with psychology. So again, if you look at like any sport, psychology is always like the viewed as like the least important thing, or the psychologist is the first one out, the last one in kind of thing. So, but one NGB in particular that I've worked with did a lot of work, especially within coach education, around reflection, and kind of they termed it as like understanding the self. So if we understand ourselves more, then we're able to be a better coach. Because, so for example, they spent a lot of time looking at how a coach can understand who they are, kind of what are their preferences. So I don't know if you've come across Spotlight. I think it's a company called Mindflick, and it's kind of looking at, and you can critique that kind of thing, because it's like, right, it's like personality profiling, like you are red or green or whatever, and you could spend all day ripping it apart. But this kind of just looks at your preferences. Who are you as a person, but then how do you flex and kind of adapt to somebody else? So I might be one kind of person and you might be a completely opposite, but we might need to work together. So how do I flex and adapt to accommodate you in your ways, and then how do we work together effectively? So that a specific NGB kind of that I worked with did a lot of work in that area, and then they adopted Think Aloud quite eagerly, because they saw it as a way for coaches to better understand themselves. They were quite passionate about encouraging reflection. So I know, like, within one specific qualification that they give hours for reflection. So if you need to generate a certain amount of hours of experience and practice, well, reflection was seen as a really important part of that. So that for me makes me see that they value reflective practice if they're giving a coach an allocated amount of time to be able to commit to that. And then when I worked, so these guys won't mind me talking about, like, naming them, but I did work with some coaches at St Helens Rugby League Club. So this is with their like scholarship coaches and the younger level coaches. And they I went along and delivered the first ever Think Aloud program with them. And as a result of that, they then kind of committed a little bit more time to reflecting, and they would get together after a coaching session as a group of coaches and share their reflections of their session. So that was a really positive kind of outcome of that program, is that they just became a lot more comfortable to share their reflections, because I think that's one of the biggest problems or issues, is that we can be quite self-conscious as humans and worried about being judged by other people. Yeah, once we get comfortable with the whole vulnerability issue and knowing that we're all in the same boat, then I think reflective practice and reflection becomes so much more easier. So yeah, I've only got kind of experience of a few NGBs and a few organisations, but there is differences between them, but I think ultimately it comes down to time and finances and what people value. So if they don't value the term reflect, I used to think, you'd say, oh, I'm going to talk about reflection today, and people go, oh, students do it. So, and I think that was one of the drivers for the whole reflection in action with Think Aloud. How can we make reflection kind of, I was going to say sexy, you can never make it sexy, but I'm getting ahead of myself there. But yeah, how can we make it more time efficient as well? More in the moment? How can we kind of build it into the experience more? So yeah.
Know exactly with the students, know exactly what you're talking about. I used to teach on a degree program, and every module, one of the assessment tasks was write a reflection of this, write a reflection of this. And it got to the point where they were looking at it, and almost the term reflection became quite a negative term.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got to do a reflection. I've got to do reflection. So we tried to go, right, well, you've got to reflect because we know it's good to do. So let's try and create some different mediums by which you can go about this reflection. So it's not just, oh, write a 1,200 word assignment on, because it does get, and you end up comparing them, and they end up saying the same things, and especially in a degree context, they've got to, reference it, and it all just ends up being the same piece of work, but with a different subject attached to it. So yeah, giving them something different, a different way of going about it is, making it more interesting. I'm getting there towards the sexy term, but making it more interesting. And you said about coaches kind of knowing themselves more. And I think as a performer, as an athlete, then that's as useful. It's totally transferable, isn't it, to an individual as to it is to a coach. Knowing themselves more, knowing what their motivations are, knowing where they actually want to be. I think it's a bit harder with recreation because there isn't an end goal as such of, I want to do this in a quicker time, or I want to compete and win this, but it could be that I want to go and do that trip, or I'd like to go and I see people playing in that environment all the time. I'd like to go and do that. And that could be a good motivator for them.
Yeah, there's a game that I play with my students that's rooted in reflection, and thus far I've been using it to anticipate conditions along the next section of coastline, because I noticed that while it's very worthy for me to ask questions that draw people's focus towards the environment around them, it can get a bit samey after a while, and you get a bit of pushback. And also, not everybody wants to spend all day analyzing everything. It's hard work, isn't it?
Yeah.
And some people are more into it than others. So what I've been doing is playing a game where, and it helps me that typically I've got a team of about 4 people to paddle with. We'll consider the prospects of carrying on along a section of coastline. I usually pick a moment when conditions are going to get quite interesting. There's going to be a development, things are going to change. And I'll give them all about a minute to have a think about stuff, because we don't want it to turn into an endless game. And I'll get somebody to be the analyst in the group. Somebody else can use their intuition to just use their gut feeling for what they think is going to be happening. And a third person can bring their optimism to play. They can be analytical or they can be intuitive, but they're going to be optimistic about what we're likely to encounter. And they've got to provide a rationale for that. And then we've got a pessimist as well. So everyone gets a minute to think of it in terms of their particular way of processing the information. And if we do it multiple times, everyone gets to do every job. They then get 30 seconds to present their argument to the group. So the analyst reels off a bunch of things that might be relevant to us on the way around the corner, and the gut feeling person just tells us what they've got in the pit of their stomach about what's going to happen next. And we got the optimist and the pessimist, and then together we collate all that and we make a decision about what we're going to do next. And I've found that it's kind of stimulating. It's fun to do. Everyone enjoys switching between different ways of anticipating the next outcome. And it probably reinforces the notion that we could collect information in different ways. Some of it might be more or less reliable. Some of it might be more or less aligned to our natural preferences in the moment. I'm still playing with it, and it's not rooted in any academic thought. It's just an idea I had one day. So I've been using my students as guinea pigs along the way. Thus far, they're enjoying it, and we seem to be getting something out of it. And I might start using it after we've paddled along a section of coastline, but I think that's going to require a bit more thought on my part before I jump in there. I don't know if any of that's useful, but
Mhm.
if anyone's listening to this podcast, they could turn that into a more useful exercise for leaders and paddlers, and then they could tell me how to make effective use of it. So I'll look forward to some feedback that's coming my way.
I love it, Nick. But yeah, using it afterwards, that kind of reinforces the stuff we're talking about, isn't it? It's not just the before and the during. It's afterwards as well. Time's marched on, massively marched on, and like the subject that we're talking about, it can be quite cognitively challenging. I've found this evening great. I've really enjoyed it, but I've also found it it's tough on me thinking. It's been easy on other podcasts because I've been able to kind of think of questions and things to go, but I'm actually constantly reflecting on the stuff we're talking about, and it's made me a bit slow with me thinking. So maybe I need to go away and listen to this in my own time as well, and pick up on the bits that I might not have picked up on during the recording. So it's been excellent. Thank you very much, Amy, for your time tonight, because I know it's been a bit of backwards and forwards, and I keep letting you down. So it's really good that you've managed to take an hour and a half to chat to us tonight. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we wrap this up, or have we covered it all?
Yeah, no, thanks to you and Nick for the great conversation. I wish I had more examples from adventure sport, but if anyone or yourself are kind of looking at using Think Aloud, well, I know you do use it, but more formally, anyone wants to do any research on it, then I'd be more than happy to get involved. I'm always looking to use Think Aloud in any sport and environment as many as possible. So yeah, I'd be dead interested, and thanks to you too, because I've made a few notes and pinched a few ideas from you as well. So it's been equally as beneficial.
If anyone wanted to do any more reading, is there any kind of freely available information out there that they can get hold of?
So I've done a few blogs that are available, like for the BPS. Yeah, I've done a couple for the BPS that I think are online. At the minute, I'm designing some resources for UK coaching that if people are members of UK coaching would be available. And then there's other podcasts that I've done. But if anyone does want to kind of read any of the research that I've done, I can provide pre-published versions. So all they need to do is go onto my LGMU webpage and have a look at what they might be interested in, and just drop me an email, and I can send over any of that literature for anyone to kind of have a read of.
That's amazing. Thanks a lot for that. I'll put a link in the notes to where they can find that page. So yeah, thanks again, and hopefully we can chat again soon.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks to you and Nick, and we'll catch up soon.
If you've enjoyed the show, why not take a look at our Essential Members Programme? For only £3.60 a month, you get exclusive access to a huge range of videos, articles and webinars covering technical skills, leadership principles and coaching issues from the world of paddle sports, with many topics easily transferred to other adventure sports. We think it's amazing value, so come and check it out. Remember, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Until next time, have fun and stay safe.